Living in the Heart by Drunvalo, Melchizedek. Introduction. Long, long ago, we humans were quite different. We could communicate and experience in ways that only a few in today's modern world would even begin to understand. We could use a form of communication and sensing that does not involve the brain whatsoever, but rather comes from a sacred space within the human heart. In Australia, the Aborigines are still connected in an ancient web of life they call dreamtime. In this collective dream, or a state of consciousness, they continue to exist within their hearts and live and breathe in a world that has become almost completely lost to today's Western mind. Nearby, in New Zealand, the Maori can see across the vastness of space to the United States in their meditations. In this manner, they link in actual communication with the Hopi to set up meetings to exchange their prophecies. Without sending a single technological communication, the arrangements are made. In Hawaii, the kahuna commune with Mother Earth to ask for the place where the fish are swimming to feed their people. The billowing white clouds in the pristine blue sky turn into the shape of a human hand that points to the teeming fish below. In a high mountain valley deep in the Sierra Nevada mountains of Colombia, South America, lives a tribe of indigenous people who know the language that has no words. This language comes from a sacred space within their hearts, if only we could remember. Before Babylon, the Holy Bible said humankind was blessed with a single language that all peoples on the earth knew. But afterwards, we were split into hundreds of spoken languages, creating barriers among us, keeping us separate from one another, each in our own little introverted world. The mistrust born of misunderstanding was our involuntary fate. In this fashion, we were destined to be pitted against each other. We couldn't talk to each other. It was separation in the coldest form, even if they were born of the same cosmic source. Brothers and sisters were unable to express their thoughts and feelings and soon became enemies. As the centuries piled on each other, the ancient way of entering the heart to experience the common dream got lost in the isolation of the human mind. This is a book of remembering. You have always had this place within your heart, and it is still there now. It existed before creation, and it will exist even after the last star shines its brilliant light. At night, when you enter your dreams, you leave your mind and enter the sacred space of your heart. But do you remember, or do you only remember the dream? Why am I telling you this? Why am I telling you about this? Something that is fading from our memories. What good would it do to find this place again in a world where the greatest religion is science and the logic of the mind? Don't I know that this is a world where emotions and feelings are second-class citizens? Yes, I do, but my teachers have asked me to remind you who you really are. You are more than just a human being, much more. For within your heart is a place, a sacred place, where the world can literally be remained through conscious co-creation. If you really want peace of spirit, and if you want to return home, I invite you into the beauty of your own heart. With your permission, I will show you what has been shown to me. I will give you the exact instructions to the pathway into your heart, where you and God are intimately one. It is your choice, but I must warn you, within this experience resides great responsibility. Life knows when a spirit is born to the higher worlds. and life will use you as all the great masters who have ever lived have been used. If you read this book and do the meditation and then expect nothing to change in your life, you may get caught spiritually napping. Once you have entered the light of the great darkness, your life will change. Eventually, you will remember who you really are. Eventually, your life will become a life of service to humanity. In the last 2 chapters reside a surprise and a glimpse of great hope. The human light body that surrounds the body for about 55 to 60 feet in diameter. The Merkaba, which I wrote about in my first 2 books, The Ancient Secret of the Flower of Life, Volumes 1 and 2, has a secret inherently connected to this sacred space of the heart. If you are practicing the Merkaba meditation in your life, I believe you will find the information in this book to be paramount to your journey of ascension into the higher worlds of light. If you are only interested in the sacred space of the heart, may these words be a blessing in your life and help you remember your true nature. One last comment. This book is written with the least amount of words possible to convey the meaning and to keep the integrity of the essence of this experience. The images are purposely simple. It is written from the heart, not the mind. Chapter 1, beginning with the mind. Almost at random, I chose a seemingly arbitrary point in my life to begin my story. Not while I was in meditation of the higher worlds of sacred geometry or the Merkaba, but in a simple everyday scene where I made a decision to help the earth heal her environment using technology of the mind. I feel we all have this responsibility, and if I was going to talk about it as I did in some of my public lectures, I had to live it. So I opened myself to all the possibilities that might come my way of how I could personally help heal the environmental conditions on our dear earth. But so that you understand, it is not the subject of cleaning the environment itself that is the reason why I'm telling you this story. It is what happened to me and how my life changed while I was experimenting with the environmental machine called the R2 that began to open my spirit to a new and different manner of experiencing life. Little did I know at the time that these technological experiments would lead beyond my mind into uncharted parts of my consciousness and deep into a secret place within my heart. Clearing the air with technology. The story begins in May of 1996 when an old friend called me up and asked if I was interested in helping on the air pollution clearing project he was involved with in Denver, Colorado. I'll keep this name quiet since I believed he would want me to. I'll just call him John. This man was a renegade scientist studying all aspects of life and the physical world in a small but sophisticated home lab. I doubt his IQ could even be measured, as he was clearly a master genius. He had created a new way to see into the reality using microwave emissions, which gave him a tremendous advantage in searching for answers in our world. Even our government, knowing his work, was not able to duplicate it until just recently. John said that he and his associates, one of whom was Slim Sperling, with his incredible coils had found out something about nature that could heal some of the environmental problems of the planet, and he wanted me to see what it was. He said that they had cleared up the air pollution in Denver and that the air was now pristine. He asked me to come and see for myself. I could hardly believe this, since I used to live in Boulder, Colorado, just a few miles from Denver, which had at that time, in the late 70s, the worst air quality in America, worse than Los Angeles even. It was one of the reasons I'd left Boulder in the first place. Actually, I thought John might be exaggerating, but knowing his intellect and genius, pretty much anything was possible. So I figured, why not? I needed to get away anyhow, and this looked like something that at the very least would be interesting. I decided to go with an open mind, with no expectations, even if what he said wasn't true. This trip would bring me close to the snow-capped mountains of the Rockies, which always made me feel more alive. A week later, I stepped off the plane in Denver into a virginal atmosphere, the likes of which I had rarely seen in my life. It was more like there was no atmosphere. I could see the trees on the mountains in the far distance, 20 miles away. I just stood there, like a lost tourist in a strange land, gawking at the cleanness I never saw in 5 years. I lived there. To say my interest was piqued is putting it mildly. I was stoked. Could John really have done this? An airport taxi crawled up next to me, the driver exuding a soft, relaxed state of mind. He motioned for me to get in the front seat as though I was his old friend, and within minutes we were silently gliding towards Slim Sperling's home and research lab, a place I had never seen before but had heard great stories about. I remember looking into the taxi driver's eyes, and he seemed to be completely stress-free, an unusual quality for a taxi driver. I asked him how he liked his job. Looking at the road ahead, he said that he loved what he did. To him, people were like open books, telling him stories of their experiences as they travelled around the world. On this note, he asked me why I was in Denver. I told him I was there to find an answer to the world's pollution problems. He looked at me, this time with a childlike innocence, and said, "It's all gone now. Look, no air pollution." I told him I could see that the air was amazingly clean. "More than that," he said, "everyone I know feels good. Do you know what happened?" I didn't have an answer to his question, and soon we pulled up to a series of old 2-story apartment buildings on the long street that eventually ends at the Colorado School of Mines in Golden, Colorado. Here I was to meet Slim Sperling, one of the researchers compiling the experimental information on a new pollution reduction instrument called the R2. This was a magical invention that somehow captured the waveform of a rain cloud just as it was about to lighten and sent it over a 35-mile area, breaking hydrocarbons down into harmless molecules, oxygen and water vapor. Was it really true? It definitely felt like it from breathing the air on Slim's street. I knocked and heard Slim yell for me to come in, and so I did. His house was definitely a laboratory and not a place to live, sleep and eat. It soon became clear that his place to live was upstairs, separate from his researching world. Strange copper coils of various sizes were sitting around the floor, and there were other things that only God and Slim knew what were there. To this man, who looked like a cross between Merlin with his long white beard and an old cowboy searching for a lost cow to herd home, these old coils were actually doing something to help clean up Denver's air pollution. John was not there on the first day, but Slim, his co-inventor, and 2 other researchers who were testing the equipment were. Soon the 2 left for the day, and I was alone with Slim and could begin to understand this man, who was another genius, as it rapidly became apparent. I stayed with Slim and his colleagues for a few days, learning what they felt they could share with me. Here is how an R2 works. Actually, there is much more to it, but the following is an approximation. The waveform a rain cloud emits, just as it is about to discharge lightning, is duplicated in a special machine. This is not the R2. It is then put on a computer chip in the R2, whose speaker system sends it into the atmosphere through an embedded coil called an harmonizer. The waveform then grows and expands into the shape of a toroidal field, which is like a donut, affecting the gravity waves to clean up the pollution from a distance. The R2 has 4 dials attached to the end of threaded metal rods, forming a tetrahedron. The dials can be turned to tune the toroidal field so that it becomes alive. John and Slim both considered the toroidal energy fields to be alive, and so would I after I witnessed how it interacted with nature. I tried to keep an open mind since much of this was new to me at the time. First I learned how to tune an R2 by a feeling in my third eye as I turned the 4 dials on the unit. Really, it was very easy, as I'd had so much experience in the psychic field. Doing this seemed completely natural to me. Later, I realized that only a few could do this right, but almost any sensitive can be trained. I continued my training until the day when Slim and John felt that I was ready to test my skills. I was to tune an R2 in nature and bring a small area of Denver that had gone out of tuning back into balance. If an R2 goes out of tune, the area it is working on will go back to its original polluted state very quickly, usually within 2 weeks. At this point, I could hardly believe that any area of Denver could be dirty, but both of them said it was true. We drove about 20 miles into the southeastern part of Denver, an area I was not familiar with, and then to the far outer edge of the city, parked the car just off the freeway, and began to walk up the side of a sloping hill to the ridgeline. As we climbed the hill, a small forest emerged toward the top. I'll never forget what I saw as I reached the top of this hill and looked down into the low, wide valley on the other side. The entire valley was filled with a reddish-brown cloud of pure pollution stretching for several miles, underneath a small aspen tree. Hidden from view to anyone just casually walking by was an operating R2 unit quietly singing its melody of a rain cloud. The problem was that it was out of tune. John and Slim told me to sit down in front of the R2 and they would see if I had learned my lessons. Filled with intense interest and a childlike sense of wonder, I sat down, cross-legged, in front of the unit and closed my eyes, beginning the meditation and sensing what would tune the unit. Just as I started to turn the dials, John stopped me and said, "Keep your eyes open and watch the pollution cloud." This was not how I had been trained, but I obeyed, watched the cloud, and once more started to adjust the dials. John stopped me again and said, "Also listen to the birds." I turned to him and said, "What?" No one had mentioned birds to me during my entire training. He repeated, "Just listen to the birds, you'll understand." I had no idea what he was talking about, but I began anyway. As I turned the first dial, I felt the area change for miles around, but nothing happened in the visible world. Once I had adjusted the 4th dial, however, 2 things further. John and Slim had the R2 tested by an independent lab in Fort Collins. Once I had adjusted the 4th dial, however, 2 things happened simultaneously, and both surprised and shocked me. Instantly, the reddish-brown cloud of pollution disappeared, leaving a clean atmosphere. It was just like a miracle. And at the same moment the cloud disappeared, About 100 birds began to wildly chirp and sing all around me. I hadn't known they were even there. The two events together had the oddest effect on me physically, psychically. I'd seen and felt the power of the R2, and in that instant I knew for certain that this new science was real and that I simply had to learn more by direct experience. During this time, especially in 1995 and early 1996, Denver's air became extremely clean while the R2 was running, but the city's EPA took full credit for this phenomenon. The agency said that the measures it took were the reasons Denver's air became so clean. However, I watched as the R2 instantly cleaned large areas of Denver right before my eyes, so I realized that Denver's EPA was simply taking credit for something it had almost nothing to do with. Further, John and Slim had the R2 tested by an independent lab in Fort Collins, Colorado, which proved beyond a doubt that the R2 was doing exactly what they claimed it was. The testers had the unit run for a period of time and then they shut it off. They scientifically recorded that the pollution dropped while the R2 was running and then rose when it was shut off. They did this over and over for a period of, as I remember, about 3 months. Also, the United States Air Force from Kirkland Air Force Base was watching this experiment as well as the one that I began in Phoenix, which I will speak about soon, and asked if we would submit ourselves and our equipment to their scientific scrutiny. We agreed, and those tests proved conclusively that the R2 really did clean air pollution.